A rising tide of conflict, expanding settlements, and escalating. Israeli military operations has revived urgent questions about the role of Christian Zionism in shaping political and religious worldviews, and in influencing both American and Israeli decision-making. This narrative explores how Western evangelical interpretations of Scripture evolved into one of the most powerful ideological engines supporting the Zionist project, providing theological justification for occupation, settlement expansion, and recurring wars in the region. Christian Zionism did not emerge from within Jewish communities. Long before political Zionism took shape, evangelical movements in Europe, especially in Britain, promoted the idea of gathering Jews in Palestine as part of a divine plan tied to the return of Christ. Figures such as the British clergyman William Heckler played a decisive role in supporting Theodor Herzl, opening diplomatic doors and embedding Zionism within European political circles. Ironically, Herzl himself was initially hesitant about Palestine as the exclusive site for a Jewish state, while Christian supporters insisted on it for strictly theological reasons rooted in biblical prophecy. Christian Zionism relies on a literal reading of selected Old Testament passages, portraying Jews as God's chosen people and Palestine as a divinely promised land. The establishment of Israel is framed not as a political event, but as a prophetic milestone leading toward the rebuilding of the Third Temple, the Battle of Armageddon, and the return of Christ. These interpretations transform religious text into political tools used to justify territorial control, reject compromise, and sanctify policies that reshape Palestinian land and life. Extremist religious voices have even called for removing the Dome of the Rock to pave the way for the Third Temple, while radical Jewish groups have attempted attacks on the Haram al-Sharif in past decades. Central to Christian Zionist doctrine is the belief in a final apocalyptic war, Armageddon, which many adherents view as a necessary precursor to Christ's return. Paradoxically, this worldview anticipates the destruction of large numbers of Jews before ultimate salvation, creating a deep contradiction. Unconditional support for Israel today, paired with a prophecy foreseeing the disappearance of most Jews tomorrow. American support for Israel is shaped not only by strategic interest, but also by influential religious constituencies that view Israel as a sacred component of divine destiny. The decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem exemplifies the fusion of theology and foreign policy, celebrated by evangelical Zionists as a prophetic milestone. Inside Israel, political transformations have elevated hardline religious nationalist figures such as Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, leaders who framed the expansion of Greater Israel as a religious obligation rather than a political choice. The alliance between Israeli religious Zionism and American Christian Zionism has created a powerful ecosystem that encourages maximalist territorial ambitions and provides a theological shield for policies in the occupied Palestinian territories. Christian Zionism rests on a literalist approach to Scripture that detaches text from their historical context. The use of religion to advance geopolitical agendas is not new. It is part of a long historical trajectory, intertwined with Western expansion in the region. Today, Christian Zionism is no longer a fringe theological movement. It has become a significant political force with deep influence inside American and Israeli institutions by offering a religious justification for occupation, settlement, and war. Its adherents claim they are witnessing the unfolding of biblical prophecy. The conflict is no longer only about land and borders. It has become a struggle over history, religion, identity, and the power to shape narratives that will determine the future of the region and potentially the world.
The symbol known today as the Shield of David, or Magen David, is widely presented as an ancient emblem of the Jewish people, rooted in the era of King David and carried through millennia of history. But the historical record tells a different story. Archaeology, textual analysis, and comparative cultural studies show that the hexagram was not used by King David. It was not a Jewish religious symbol for most of Jewish history, and it only became associated with Judaism in the 17th century, later gaining political meaning in the 19th and 20th centuries. This narration explores the gap between historical evidence and modern national narratives, and how a universal geometric motif was transformed into a contemporary emblem. The historical record shows that the hexagram predates Judaism by thousands of years. Archaeological evidence places the six-pointed star in ancient Egypt, where it appeared in funerary art and cosmology. In Mesopotamia, it represented the union of male and female principles. In India, it appeared as the Hindu Shatkona, symbolizing cosmic balance. It is found in Buddhist mandalas, in Greek magical papyri, and throughout Islamic architecture, including Ottoman, Mamluk, and Andalusian designs. In all these contexts, the hexagram was decorative, cosmological, or magical, not ethnic or national. No biblical or early Jewish source mentions a six-pointed star. No artifact from the first or second temple periods bears this symbol. No early rabbinic text assigns it religious meaning. For more than 2,000 years, Judaism functioned without this emblem. The first confirmed Jewish adoption of the hexagram occurred in Prague in 1648 during the Swedish siege. The emperor allowed each militia group to carry its own flag. A Jesuit priest designed a hexagram for the Jewish defenders. This was not a rediscovery of an ancient tradition. It was a 17th century European creation. Over the next 2 centuries, the symbol appeared on synagogue walls, on community seals, and in printing houses. But even then, it was not universal and held no religious authority. It was simply a decorative emblem used by some Ashkenazi communities. In the late 19th century, the Zionist movement sought a unifying emblem for Jewish communities worldwide. They needed a symbol not tied to religious law, simple enough for a flag and recognizable across regions. The hexagram fit these needs. Prominent families, including the Rothschilds, had already used the hexagram in their heraldry, giving it visibility and prestige. The first Zionist Congress in 1897 adopted it as the central emblem of the movement. It was chosen not because it was ancient, but because it was available, recognizable, and politically useful. In 1948, the symbol became the centerpiece of the flag of the State of Israel. Its meaning shifted from a communal emblem to a national symbol, gaining political and military significance. The modern narrative presents the hexagram as the Shield of David, dating back to biblical times and representing ancient Jewish identity. But historical evidence does not support this claim. No biblical text mentions such a symbol. No artifact from the era of David contains it. No Jewish community used it as a religious emblem before the 1600s. Its widespread use in Islamic and Asian art contradicts the idea of exclusivity. National symbols often require a sense of antiquity. Modern states frequently construct narratives of deep historical continuity. In this case, the hexagram became a retroactive symbol, projected backward into history. Understanding the real history of the hexagram matters because symbols shape political legitimacy. Presenting the hexagram as ancient and uniquely tied to one identity reinforces claims of historical continuity and cultural ownership. Correcting the historical record does not challenge Judaism as a religion. It simply distinguishes between religious tradition and modern political symbolism. The six-pointed star is not an ancient Jewish symbol. It is a global geometric form adopted by some Jewish communities in the 17th century and transformed into a national emblem in the modern era. The narrative that presents it as a biblical symbol
is not supported by historical evidence. Clarifying this history is not an attack on any faith. It is a commitment to historical accuracy.
Here we explore the deep historical roots of the Palestinian identity, tracing its development across thousands of years. It examines the continuity of human presence in the land, and how this continuity challenges modern political claims that attempt to redefine the history of Palestine. This is a historical analysis. The story begins in prehistoric times, archaeological discoveries in Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, show human settlement dating back to 10,000 years before the Common Era. These early communities formed the foundation of the populations that would later develop into the peoples of ancient Palestine. By the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, the land was home to the Canaanites. They built cities such as Jericho, Megiddo, Gaza, and Jebus, the ancient name of Jerusalem. They spoke a Semitic language that would later give rise to both Arabic and Hebrew. Their culture, religion, and urban life shaped the earliest layers of identity in the region. During the periods of the ancient Israelite and Judean kingdoms, the land remained ethnically and culturally mixed. These kingdoms were geographically small and historically brief compared to the long history of Palestine. Even in those eras, most inhabitants were local peoples whose roots extended back to the Canaanites and other Levantine groups. After the Babylonian and Roman periods, the population of the land did not disappear. There was no empty land. Farmers, craftsmen, and local communities remained, evolving through time. These are the ancestors of today's Palestinians. Under Greek and Roman rule, the name Palestine became widely used in official documents. It was derived from earlier references to Philistia, the coastal region of the ancient Philistines. During this era, Christianity spread early in the land, forming the foundation of the Palestinian Christian identity. With the arrival of Islam in the 7th century, the population did not experience replacement. Instead, the people of the land gradually adopted the Arabic language and embraced new cultural and religious influences. Cities such as Jerusalem, Nablus, Gaza, Ramla, and Hebron became centers of learning and culture. This period shaped the linguistic and cultural identity of the Palestinian people as we know them today. During the Ottoman era, Palestine was a recognized geographic and administrative region. Its people identify themselves as the inhabitants of Palestine. Newspapers, records, and official documents from the 19th century clearly used the term Palestinians to describe the local population. This identity existed long before modern political movements emerged. The Palestinian identity is not a recent invention. It is the product of thousands of years of cultural development shaped by Canaanites, Arameans, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Muslims, and Christians. It is a living identity rooted in the land through continuous human presence. Understanding this history shows that the people of Palestine are not newcomers. They are the natural continuation of the region's ancient inhabitants. Their identity is not a reaction to modern politics. It is a deep historical reality. No modern legal system recognizes divine promises as territorial claims. This applies to all religions. The Old Testament exists in multiple versions with differences in wording, boundaries, genealogies, and territorial descriptions. There is no single original text, because the scriptures differ across the Masoretic text, the Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Christian editions. The claim that God granted exclusive political ownership cannot be treated as a literal historical statement. It is interpretation, not objective fact. Even within Judaism, interpretations differ. Some view the promise as metaphorical, some as spiritual, some as conditional, and some as limited to ancient times. This diversity shows that no single reading is binding. A divine promise is a matter of faith, not a historical event.
verifiable by archaeology. Archaeology shows continuous habitation of Palestine for more than 10,000 years, with no evidence of total population replacement and no exclusive ancient ownership by one group. History does not support exclusive divine land claims. Faith cannot override the lived history of other peoples. Religious belief cannot erase the continuous presence of communities who lived on the land for thousands of years. International law recognizes continuous population, cultural continuity, and historical presence, not theological claims. Understanding this distinction clarifies the difference between faith, history, and modern political narratives. These should never be confused.
Having explored the history of the Star of David and the deep roots of the Palestinian people, we now turn to the modern era, when new populations arrived in Palestine from Europe under a political movement known as Zionism. This examines the historical context of that migration, focusing strictly on the political project that emerged in Europe in the late 19th century. Zionism began as a European nationalist movement. Its founders were not from the Middle East. They were European activists and political organizers who lived in Vienna, Basel, Odessa, and other European cities. Their writings, debates, and congresses were shaped by European political thought, European nationalism, and European colonial expansion. The movement's leaders described their project in the language of European nation building, not in the language of ancient Middle Eastern continuity. The early Zionist settlers who arrived in Palestine between the 1880s and the 1930s came primarily from Eastern and Central Europe. They were immigrants from Russia, Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, Germany, and Austria. They did not speak the languages of the region. They did not share its culture. They arrived as organized groups with political objectives, land acquisition strategies, and settlement plans modeled on European colonial practices of the time. These settlers did not integrate into the existing society. Instead, they established separate agricultural colonies, separate labor systems, and separate institutions. Their goal was not to join the indigenous population, but to build a new society alongside it, eventually replacing it. This approach was openly discussed in early Zionist writings, which described the need to create a new majority in a land where the overwhelming majority of inhabitants were Palestinian Arabs. By the early 20th century, Zionist organizations were often displacing Palestinian farmers who had lived on and cultivated the land for generations. These actions were not religious in nature. They were political and strategic, designed to create exclusive settlement zones. Many historians describe this process as a form of settler colonialism, similar to European projects in Algeria, South Africa, and North America. The British mandate accelerated this transformation. British policies facilitated large-scale immigration and granted political advantages to Zionist institutions. During this period, the demographic balance of Palestine shifted rapidly, not through natural population growth, but through organized migration from Europe. By 1947, more than half of the Jewish population in Palestine consisted of recent European arrivals. This history shows that the modern population movement into Palestine was not an ancient return, but a contemporary political project rooted in European nationalism. It was not the continuation of a local Middle Eastern community, but the arrival of new settlers from abroad. This does not deny the historical or religious significance of the land to Jews. It simply distinguishes between ancient heritage and modern political migration. Understanding this context is essential. It clarifies that the conflict in Palestine is not a clash of ancient peoples, but the result of a modern colonial movement entering a land with an existing population whose roots stretch back thousands of years. The Palestinian people are the descendants of those ancient inhabitants.
The Zionist settlers were newcomers shaped by European history, European identity, and European political ideology. This distinction matters because it separates faith from politics, heritage from colonization, and identity from modern territorial claims. It allows us to understand the present not as an inevitable outcome of ancient history, but as the product of decisions made in Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. And it reminds us that the people of Palestine did not vanish. They remained in their land, carrying forward the continuous human story that began in Jericho 10,000 years ago.
Having traced the ancient roots of the Palestinian people, and having examined the modern history of Zionist settlement in Palestine, we now turn to the most difficult and essential question. What comes next? And how can justice be restored for a people whose homeland has been fragmented, occupied, and reshaped by a modern colonial project? Any meaningful resolution must begin with truth. Without acknowledging what happened, no future can be built. The Palestinian people are an indigenous population with continuous presence in their land for thousands of years. The Zionist movement, by contrast, was a modern political project that brought organized settlers from Europe into a land already inhabited. These two historical realities must be recognized side by side, not to assign blame to individuals, but to understand the structure of the conflict. A just future cannot be built on domination. It cannot be built on military control, on equal rights, or systems that privilege one population over another. Justice requires a transformation from a system of separation and hierarchy into a system of equality and shared humanity. This does not mean erasing anyone. It means ending the structures that deny one people their homeland and their basic rights. For Palestinians, the right to homeland means more than borders. It means freedom of movement, control over resources, cultural continuity, and the ability to live without checkpoints, siege, or displacement. It means the right of refugees to return. It means dignity restored after generations of dispossession. For Jewish communities living in the land, homeland must mean safety, cultural freedom, and the ability to live without fear. But it cannot mean exclusive ownership or permanent supremacy. A homeland built on inequality cannot endure. A homeland built on shared rights can. There are many possible political frameworks: one democratic state, two sovereign states, or a shared confederation. But the structure matters less than the principles behind it. Any just outcome must guarantee equal rights for all who live there. It must end military rule. It must restore what can be restored. And it must ensure that no group's security is built on another group's confinement. International law provides a clear foundation. It recognizes continuous population, cultural continuity, and historical presence. It rejects territorial claims based on theology. It affirms the rights of displaced peoples to return. These principles point toward a future where Palestinians regain their homeland not by removing others, but by ending the system that removed them. The path forward requires courage from all sides. It requires acknowledging that the conflict is not a clash of ancient peoples, but the result of modern political decisions. It requires recognizing that Palestinians did not vanish. They remained, carrying forward the human story that began in Jericho 10,000 years ago. And it requires understanding that justice is not a threat to anyone's existence. It is the only foundation on which a shared future can be built. In the end, the question is not who belongs. Both peoples live there now. The real question is what kind of system will define their future. One built on domination, or one built on equality. One built on exclusion, or one built on shared humanity. One built on myth, or one built on truth. A just peace begins when the indigenous people regain their rights, when the structures of inequality end,
And when the land becomes a place where no one's freedom depends on another's dispossession, only then can the homeland of Palestine become what it has always been: a land of many histories, many cultures, and one shared human future.